So first of all, welcome to Bevel Books and Bourbon. For those of you who aren't familiar, Bevel is a strategic communications consultancy based in New York. We have offices here, Miami, Los Angeles, Boston, and Orlando. We've been doing Bevel Books and Bourbon for about 7 years now, highlighting award-winning books and best-selling authors in local spaces like this in New York City. This event was born from the concept of loving telling stories and working with journalists to do so, and celebrating people and brands behind them. We're really excited to hear from Polina today, a little bit about the book, and we're giving away 50 signed copies. So if after the session you guys queue up, she has some signed copies that she's completed, and she'll introduce herself and you guys can take a picture. After that, if we go past the 50 copies, we have a QR code where you can get them on Amazon. Stick around for additional networking, and we have some exciting news coming over the next few months from Bevel, so we're excited to share that with you all as well. I also want to thank our sponsors. So Avenue Z is our parent company at Bevel. We were acquired back in April, so we thank them for this, and also for the Strand as well for being a partner in this. So I'll share a little bit about our speakers. So our author today is Polina Pompliano. She's the founder of The Profile, a new media company that features successful people and does long-form profiles each week. She spent 5 years at Fortune and wrote more than 1,300 articles and earned the trust of prominent investors and entrepreneurs. As the author and editor of Term Sheet, Polina interviewed the industry's most influential deal makers, including Melinda Gates, Steve Case, and Alexis Ohanian, and more. She lives in New York City with her husband and their 2 kids. Our moderator today is Emma Hincliffe. She is a journalist based in New York also. She's the author of The Broadsheet, Fortune's daily newsletter covering powerful women leaders in business and the stories driving the news through a gender lens. She's a senior writer for Fortune, and so she covers stories and magazine features for influential figures like Canva's Melanie Perkins, Kim Kardashian, and Sarah Blakely of Spanx. Her live interviews have included sit-downs with business leaders from TikTok, Glossier, Best Buy, and Williams-Sonoma, and also the Duchess of Sussex. Please welcome Polina and Emma.
Hi, guys. Thank you for coming.
It's so nice to be here with you.
Yeah, you too. I feel like I should be interviewing Emma about Meghan and Harry.
No, tonight is all about you. That's the most important part. So you have been working on your newsletter, The Profile, for a while when you started writing Hidden Genius. Why was this the book you wanted to write?
So I recently heard a podcast with James Clear, and he said that when he was writing Atomic Habits, his habits were just like going crazy. He was like, I wasn't sleeping, I wasn't eating, just everything was going horribly. And he told his publisher, and the publisher said, I feel like you always write the book that you need to read. And that was Hidden Genius for me. I think every chapter taught me something. And my husband likes to joke that like, even if I sold 1 copy, I'd be like, oh, but this is so nice because I learned so much. So for me, it was like, I'd spent at that point 5 years working on The Profile. And I was like, what's next? And for me, it was like compiling all these lessons into something physical like a book.
Yeah. So what was your biggest takeaway from writing the book? What did you need to learn?
That's a great question. What did I need to learn? It was like, so the chapter that nobody ever asked me about, but that made the biggest difference was the chapter on clarifying your thinking. Because as a writer, I feel like I'm a very emotional person, and that chapter is all about like rationality and logic. So I learned a lot in terms of like mental frameworks that I needed to implement myself. So it was like, for example, Elon Musk once said like, who wrote the software running in your mind? And it's just like a lot of times I hadn't stopped and questioned some of the things that I believed, to be like, Why do I believe that? For example, in journalism, people always tell you, like, I think we both worked at our college newspapers, and the whole thing was enjoy this office because you're never going to have a bigger one. You're never going to make money being a writer. And that was like a huge thing that I needed to get over, because when I started the profile as a company, I still put it in air quotes, as a company, like I had to be okay with, hey, I'm an entrepreneur now. I'm not just a writer, and it is okay for people to pay you for your writing.
Yeah. Why does no one ever ask you about that chapter? What do they ask you about instead?
Like the relationships chapter, which is also great, but not the...
Yeah. How many people here have read Hidden Genius? Okay, cool. So everyone who hasn't can read it after. It's really amazing. Polina, what is it about profiles that you like?
I like profiles because it's so okay, first of all, I love this question. There's a writer named Katie Weaver who's now at the New York Times, but she used to be at GQ. When she was at GQ, her profiles were incredible. And she said on a podcast one time that stuck with me, she was like, I like profiles because they slow a person down. And she was like, a lot of people, the reason they like watching slow motion is because the brain has time to like soak in and absorb all the details of what they're seeing in the video. And it's like profiles are the same way. When you're reading about a person, it kind of slows them down and you get the nuance and the context that you wouldn't normally. For example, one of my favorite profiles is on Justin Bieber, not because I particularly care about Justin Bieber. My friend Laura, who's here, she sent me that profile. And the reason it's so good is because it's like they make you care about a person that you might not have ever thought about. And it was just like a human story. Justin Bieber was a really good kid who was kind of bullied for being a good kid. So he went and got arrested. He got a pet monkey. He did all the things that you would do to not be good. And then she shows like just how lonely his life is, even though he's a teenager. And instead of telling you, hey, Justin Bieber's really lonely, she shows you by like, he goes to an arcade to have fun, but they have to shut the entire arcade down because Justin Bieber's there. So he's like bowling alone. And it's just a really sad, great story.
Is that the one where Hailey Bieber's like sitting on a bed,
Yes.
not doing anything, just like in silence, waiting for him? Yeah. Okay. And that was before we knew who she was.
Yes.
So what do you think readers like about profiles? What makes them pay attention, especially for someone who's not famous, when fame is not part of the equation?
I think that what makes people care, and I actually, the profiles that I like are not celebrity profiles. I think celebrity profiles are actually really, really hard to do because these people are very media trained. So to get an actual thing from them is really difficult. You also don't have a ton of time with them often. There's another good one on Kim Kardashian in GQ. But it's, I think the reason is, for example, when you read a really great profile, you understand that person, like it humanizes them. There hasn't been a great one on Taylor Swift recently, but it's like she could benefit from being humanized because right now she's kind of like a god to some people. And the way to do that, I think is a really good profiler is that you have to put them in context. So people can tell you who they are all day long, but until you see them, that's why a lot of celebrity profiles, you'll notice they're doing an activity. So it's like whether they're going to dinner together or they're going to an art class or something like that, the reporter and the celebrity are often doing something together because the way you move through the world is who you are and the way you treat people. And there have been so many good ones. For example, Taffy Brodesser-Akner is her name. She also used to write for GQ, and she wrote a celebrity profile on Nicki Minaj, and Nicki fell asleep during their interview. And it's like, that's the worst thing that could happen to you. She's like, I have 37 minutes with you and you fell asleep. So of course you're like, what is she gonna do with that? And the really masterful writers, the narrative nonfiction writers find a way to, again, humanize her. She has a brand, she has a fragrance, she has a business. You would be tired too. So it's like that kind of thing. Ironically, even though it's a celebrity profile, I think a lot of people try to make them more human. But I mean, there's so many I could name that are not celebrities that are amazing.
Mm-hmm. So in Hidden Genius, you take a lot of these kinds of profiles and you really distill them and distill these people's stories into really actionable takeaways. So how do you go about taking people's life stories and turning them into action items that people can bring to their own lives?
Yeah, so it's like, you know, one of my ideas for a book a while back was to write a biography on someone, actually on Canva CEO Melanie Perkins, which Emma wrote a profile on. But the whole idea is like, I think a lot of us have a tendency to be like, oh, look at this person, they're a genius, I want to emulate them and like do everything that they do. But I found in interviewing a lot of people at Fortune and with the profile that like idolizing really is terrible, because you end up idolizing perfect versions of imperfect people. You're like, wow, look at Elon Musk, like he's brilliant. And then like, would you take his personal life too? I don't know. But what was the question?
Yeah. How do you take
the practical? Yes. So, so the reason that I think I don't want to focus on one person, because I mean, there are practical things you can take away, but my husband told me this. He heard it on a podcast. I forget which one. They said like, you don't want to be David Goggins 100% of the time. You want to be David Goggins 10% of the time. And that's because like, his life is extreme. You would be at dinner with him and he'd be like, be right back, I have to go run 100 miles. And you're like, oh, this sucks. So I think I wanted to take like an ounce of all of these people, of something that is actually practical that we can apply to our own lives instead of copying them one-to-one.
Mm-hmm. How did your own daily habits or mindset change before writing the book and after? What did you take away from all these people's genius?
The biggest one, I don't know whose framework this is, it's been credited to Jeff Bezos, but I'm not sure, is that I'm always kind of, when I was thinking about leaving Fortune to work on my newsletter full time, there wasn't another reporter yet that had left their like big, cushy corporate media job to do this full time and be like an entrepreneur for a newsletter. So I was kind of flying blind, but I called it the seesaw of misery. Like I would wake up and be like, yes, I'm leaving today. I'm going to put in my 2 weeks notice. And then I'd go to sleep and be like, but health insurance. So I'm very like indecisive when it comes to things, and it's hard to make a decision. And one of the frameworks that I put in the book that I use all the time is I ask myself, like, is this so the quote is, make reversible decisions quickly and make irreversible ones deliberately. Because if something is a reversible decision, you can make it. Even if you fall flat on your face and you fail, you'll probably learn more by making it than not. And then irreversible ones like, having children is an irreversible decision. You will be a parent for the rest of your life. That one should be made like slowly and deliberately. So for me, like at the end of the day, yes, I was going to leave my job to do this, but if I failed, I could always get another job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Whose advice or genius in the book resonates with you the most?
Do you guys know who Francis Ngannou is? Oh, okay. A few people. Francis was an MMA champion, heavyweight. I know nothing about MMA. I don't know what I'm saying right now. He fought. He was a fighter. No, but his story was so crazy, and I got to interview him and hear it from him, which was amazing. But he was born in Cameroon in extreme poverty. He was like a child laborer. But even as a kid, he was like, I'm going to go to America one day. And he gave himself a nickname he was like, my name's American Boy. And all his friends made fun of him because it's ridiculous. But he was like, I'm going to get to the United States. And he started like kind of living as his aspirational self, the ideal version of who he could be. So he was like, he originally wanted to be a boxer, not an MMA fighter. So he was like, I'm going to be an international, well-known boxer in the United States. And so I'm going to start living that way. So he didn't drink, he didn't smoke. He worked out every day. This is like as a teenager. And then he was like, okay, well, obviously I can't be a world famous boxer training in Cameroon. I'm going to move to, I got to get to like Europe at least and train there. So he walked through the Sahara Desert. He ultimately got to Morocco, and from there he had to get to Spain. And he was trying with like other refugees on this like little boat to get across this tiny sea. But he was sent back a few times. And what they would do is like, when they catch you, they put you either in a Moroccan prison for a unknown period of time, or they drop you back in the middle of the desert, and then you just have to like figure it out. So both of those things happened to him. And then he ultimately makes it to Paris. There he's like homeless, living in a parking garage. And he was like, oh, this is a 5-star hotel compared to where I came from. And he ultimately joined this gym. People noticed him because he was a big guy. He started training, became an MMA guy. And then from there, ultimately made it to the US. But he told me something that's so interesting, which is that before we started the interview, he was like, where are you from? And I was like, I'm from Bulgaria. And he was like, how'd you get to the US? And I was like, my family won a green card in the green card lottery. And he was like, oh yeah, like I did that. I applied for that every year too, but I never won. And people called me unlucky because I never got it. And I was like, do you still think that? And he was like, no, the lucky path for me was that I didn't win the green card lottery. My crazy winding path got me to where I am, because if I had won, I'd probably be working as like a security guard in the US or something. So it's just like one path may be easier, but it's actually maybe the unluckier path. So I think about that in success the same way. So success and luck, you can only tell if something was successful or lucky looking backwards. You can't be like, oh yeah, I won, so that's the lucky part. So I really like his story, and he's just like an amazing human.
Yeah. You write in the book as well about the definition of success and your personal definition of it. What is it today, and has it changed through this process?
Yeah. So I think as anybody, I used to define success as a measure of wealth, how much money you make, what possessions you have, where you live, like things like that are kind of stupid if you think about it. Because if you're not happy, it doesn't actually matter. And then I was on the subway and I was reading this commencement speech by Anna Quindlen from 1999. You should look it up. It's amazing. But she basically says something like, she was working at the New York Times, then she quit to be a full-time mom. And people were like, that's crazy. Then she was like, now I'm going to write a book. People are like, that's crazy. And she was like, but it's not crazy because that's what I want to do. And she has this quote where she says, like, if your success looks good to the world, but does not feel good in your heart, then it is not success at all. And then she quotes Lily Tomlin and says, even if you win the rat race, you're still a rat. So I was like, oh my God, am I a rat? So I was like, so that rat thing happened. And then I kind of put it in the back of my mind because I was like, surely I'm not. But then, you know how when you see something and you get an idea, you start seeing it everywhere. And everything you see just like confirms what you're thinking. So this was in January of 2020. And I started thinking about like, what if I leave my job at Fortune and I go work on my newsletter, The Profile, full time? At the time I had, my newsletter was free, so there's no business. But I was like, I might just, actually my husband told me to do this and I was like, I can't do that, I'll get fired. And he was like, okay, just see what happens. So I added a paid layer to my newsletter. I was like, I just want to see if people would pay for this. And And some people did. And it was enough where I was like, this is promising. So the second that I did that, I started seeing articles everywhere. The rise of the passion economy, the creator economy, the whatever economy. And I was like, oh man, like, this is the moment. This is the time to do it. So I just, after the seesaw of misery, I just started like thinking about success in a way that for me, I was scared to disappoint people, as stupid as that sounds. I was like, my parents are so proud that I work at Forbes magazine, Fortune magazine. And they're so proud and like all this stuff. Like, am I really about to leave to do this thing that I don't even know if it'll work? But I found success now is the same thing for me that I look for in the people that I interview. It's like the winding path that's not always linear. I think success is like a life well lived.
Yeah. You mentioned this process of deciding to go all in on the profile full time. A lot's changed since then in the newsletter landscape. Where do you think the newsletter ecosystem is today, and where do you think it's headed?
I think that, so I was actually recently talking about this, like having a newsletter is great. I love it. It's also, if it's a one-person operation, it can get lonely. And as with any business, if it's just you, it's kind of lonely. But I think what's going to happen is, like, we saw this unbundling of a lot of people leaving traditional media organizations. I think you're going to see a rebundling. Is that a word? I think so. A rebundling of these newsletters coming together and creating new media organizations. You see it with like Barry Weiss's Free Press. You see like legitimate things coming out of newsletters that are now, it's like a bottoms up approach.
Yeah, it's like streaming.
Yeah.
So I was, speaking of the profile, I read a recent newsletter of yours where you said that you were setting a goal to become the world's best interviewer.
If you say it, it'll happen.
Yeah. How do you go about setting a big goal like that?
Okay. Yeah. So that was clickbait, but no, it's real. I published an article yesterday, like 10 practical takeaways from the world's best interviewers, or 10 practical interviewing techniques from the world's best interviewers. And the first line is, I have a goal to become the best interviewer in the world. I want to do that partially because of the loneliness thing. So I spent the last 4 years writing. I literally, my first day full time on the profile was the first day of COVID lockdowns. So it's been lonely, but good, like good in a way. Also, then I took time to write a book, another very solitary endeavor. So now I am kind of like, what else can I learn? And I think the thing that I can learn and get much better at is interviewing people. And, we both interview people for Fortune and like conferences and things like that. But if anybody's looking for a moderator, let me know. I find people fascinating, and I think it's really hard to do a really good interview in a short period of time. So, I mean, you're doing an amazing job. I'm rambling.
We're driving. Polina, you're driving the whole thing. Yeah.
Well, that's my goal.
Yeah. What did you learn from studying how people interview?
So many things. I think the one thing that I'm really bad at, that the best interviewers do, is they know how to interrupt. And watch Emma's, she's like, all right, let me interrupt you really quick.
That's called having a conversation.
Yeah. So the interrupting is really, really powerful, because when you interrupt someone, what you're doing is like, you're highlighting a part of the conversation that you're like, what you just said is really important. Let's pause on that. But how you do it is a tactic and an art in and of itself. In the article, I included the example of Oprah during the Meghan and Harry interview, where Meghan, I personally think, accidentally shared something that she didn't plan on sharing about the palace carrying what skin color the baby would have before it was born. And she says it, Oprah goes, hold on, I'm going to stop you right there. She like throws her hands up in there, and Meghan's like, oh no. And you see her like fidget, and she doesn't know what to do. And so Oprah's like, what? And Meghan doesn't say anything. And then she's like, I'm going to stop you. Like, you have to explain. And I think part of it is Oprah's such a masterful interviewer that she knows this is a high pressure interview. millions of people are going to be watching. There needs to be scrutiny. So the second that she stops her, she asks her to elaborate, and Megan kind of changes. She's like, well, actually, it wasn't a conversation with me. It was with Harry. I wasn't there, but I know who it was. And then she was like, and who was it? And she's like, I can't say. So it's like, it's almost like a form of like investigative journalism on the spot. And then another person who does this really well, whose style I really hate, but I appreciate this. I learned why I don't like it, is David Letterman. Have you guys watched his Netflix? Yeah. Oh, well, like the reason I don't like it is I'm like, let the man speak or the woman speak, and he doesn't. But it's like, it's his technique because he doesn't like asking difficult questions like that. He likes like meandering and then going in for the kill. So with Kim Kardashian, he's like, how do you feel working with this administration about the corridors of democracy? And she's like, I don't know what that means. And he's like, let me try again. And then he starts over. And then she's like, I don't know what you're saying. And he's like, who are you going to vote for this election? It's like, where did that come from? But as the subject, you're like, I was just so confused that now this is a question I understand. I'm just going to answer.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay. So do you still love profiles? Do you ever worry we're going to run out of people?
No. No, I saw somebody on the subway who would be a fantastic subject. No, there's characters everywhere. One of the most interesting things, earlier you asked me about celebrity profiles versus regular people, is Gay Talese. He wrote, he basically set the standard for profile writing. He wrote Frank Sinatra Has a Cold, which is like the gold standard. Like this is like the profile of profiles. And yeah, it's great. And so he talks about how it's his least favorite article, which is really funny because it's so good. But he actually wasn't able to interview Frank Sinatra because he had a cold. So he interviewed everybody in his orbit, and that made it like a fascinating portrait of a man that few people really knew. But his favorite profile that he's ever written was, it was called Mr. Bad News, and it was about an obituary writer. He's like, what is it like to wake up every day and write about dead people? Like, that is fascinating. So yeah, I don't know what the lesson is.
Yeah. Well, I think you've talked a lot about this idea that no one's boring and that you just haven't asked the right questions yet. How did you come to realize that? And is there an example of a time that you've really seen that in action in your own reporting and writing?
Ooh. So when I was in college, we had like a profile writing 101 class, and I was like, this is a piece of cake. Come on, I'm a journalist. And like I was a freshman in college. And so we like picked somebody in the class, and the assignment was write a profile of them. So I thought that, this person would just like give me really good, great quotes that I could use and like juicy stories. But this 18-year-old at the University of Georgia did not have the same plan. So he was like, I don't know what I do on weekends. And I'm like, come on, man. So there was like not that much to work with. So I decided that I was just going to choose another person. So I went to my professor and I said, I've somehow chosen the most boring person on the planet. Let me just like change the person, then I'll write an amazing profile. And he said, no. And he said, basically, no one is inherently boring. You just haven't asked the right questions yet. And that stuck with me my whole career, because it's like the person you're interviewing, it's not their job to entertain you. It's your job to find the really interesting things. And at Fortune, actually, I realized how difficult profile writing was, because you think we're so different until you read something. Like, for example, when I was working at Fortune still, if you looked at Emma and I, you'd be like, all right, two women in their mid-20s, they both write newsletters, they go boxing. Do you remember when we went boxing?
Yeah, we went to Rumble.
Yeah,
it was really fun.
Our instructor's name was Jaws.
I did not remember.
Oh, you don't remember that? Oh my God. But yeah, so basically like on paper, we look pretty similar. And then if you use generalizations and absolutes, like everybody loves Emma and like no one finds her annoying or whatever, it's really hard to like pin down a person and find what makes them unique and interesting. So at Fortune, I learned that it's like kind of like it's the It's the nuance and the color and the super small, unique things that make you that are really hard to capture. And for me, I think when I was writing term sheet and I was profiling a lot of venture capitalists, I was like, oh man, this is real exercise.
Another one?
Yeah. Real exercise in, not being boring.
So speaking of the things that make you, what have you learned is your own hidden genius?
I think that I'm like genuinely curious. For me, I really like interviewing and I don't mind asking hard questions because it's coming from a place of curiosity. I'm not like, ooh, I got you. Like I'm going to burn this bridge. I think it's just like being really, really curious about really dumb things is what makes me me.
Yeah. And what advice do you have for others who might want to figure out how to find and identify their own hidden genius?
Yeah, so basically it's like the way I define hidden genius is that X factor or that like that thing that only you know based on your own unique experience in this world. For example, like I am an immigrant, moved from Bulgaria when I was 8 to Atlanta, Georgia in the South, and then I now live in New York City. I have like 3 different vantage points, and I think part of that makes me me. Like very few people have that. And I just honestly think a lot of us aren't curious enough to figure out what is our hidden genius. I was saying the other day, it's like when you have a friend who's working in a field that has zero creativity, but they're a really creative person on the side, like as a hobby. In my head, I'm always like, ooh, I know that you're eventually going to get here, but you just like define success as money and status right now. And until you realize like what actually you want to do, you're not going to leave. Mm-hmm. So read the book to find your hidden genius.
Yes. In the book, you write about people across all kinds of industries. You write about tech, entertainment, sports, politics. What do these people have in common, and what's different when it comes to that special thing that makes them excel?
I think the biggest thing they have in common, well, actually, like 3 things they have in common. The first is that they're very mentally resilient, but mentally resilient in the way that they stay on the offense. They're not on the defense. So they don't wait for like life to hit you in the face and bring you to your knees. They like seek out discomfort on a daily basis. For example, I really don't like public speaking, but I do it because it makes me practice and I get a little bit more confident when I do it. The second thing is that they know that they can always reinvent themselves. So a good example is Martha Stewart, who, she was relevant to my grandmother's generation, my mother's generation, and now to my generation. How does she do that? She constantly reinvents. And a lot of like people have forgotten that she went to prison for insider trading. And Time magazine put her on the cover, her mugshot. Like you do not recover from your mugshot being on Time's cover. So it's like that kind of thing. She was always like, what's the next step? What's the next step? And she knew that even if the worst happened, she could always reinvent. And then the third thing is that they all, at some point in their lives, bet on themselves in whatever way, whether it's quitting their job and starting a business, whether it's like leaving the country and moving somewhere else, starting over. It's like that kind of thing. And Francis Ngannou, when I interviewed him, I was like, so what's your next act? Like, because he's no longer doing MMA, I don't think. So I was like, what's your next act? And he was like, basically, he's been very vocal that the contracts in the MMA aren't fair. And I was like, aren't you scared? Like, you're so vocal. And he was like, what are they going to do to me? Like, I've been at the bottom of the bottom and I can always start over. So he said that he meets a lot of talented people, but they're never going to reach their full potential because they're afraid that, they're going to like have to start over. And he has this great quote. He told me, he said, he was like, this saying, right? And I was like, I really don't, but it's a great one. He was like, sometimes to jump farther, you need to step back. So it's like that.
Wow. Okay. We're going to have some questions for Q&A. So start thinking.
I'll start with one. I was going to ask you who your least favorite interview was, but I think it was your college colleague, classmate. But do you have a favorite interview? And actually, Emma, this probably applies to you as well.
Oh no.
Ooh, my gosh.
Is it the man who you talked to about the green card?
the man who I talked to?
You just talked about.
Oh, Francis. No, actually, I do know. Especially, I'm thinking like for the book. A man named Robert Hogue, who probably nobody knows, but he was born with a massive tumor in the middle of his face. You've probably seen the meme because it's a meme that goes around the internet of like, look at this the world's ugliest baby. Well, that was in the 70s. He was born with a massive tumor on his face, to the point where his mom kept a journal. The doctors were like, you should keep a journal for like, postpartum depression stuff, because this is really hard to get through. And she wrote, this is the ugliest baby I've ever seen. I do not want to take him home. So she actually left him at the hospital to try to decide if she wanted to take him home, and then went home and had her other kids take a vote on whether to bring this baby home. It's crazy, but he claims that he has forgiven this. So anyway, so she's like, it's going to be a really hard life for my other kids, for this kid. Do I really want to do that? Ultimately, they decide yes. He goes through so much face reconstruction surgery, and all his life he's called ugly, he's bullied, like insane things to go through as a kid. And it's my favorite interview because while I was interviewing him, I was like, so I heard once that you said your mom wrote in her journal, she said, I wish this baby was dead or something like that. And he was like, I have the journal right here. And I was like, oh my God. So it's like when moments like that happen, it really not only humanizes the person, but you're like, wow, like this is somebody's real life. And I think as an interviewer, your job is to channel that for the people reading or watching.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any other questions for Polina? Okay, awesome. We have a mic coming your way.
Right
and
behind you.
Please introduce yourself.
I'm so loud, I really don't need it. I'm going to commit a major interviewer journalist for a part and ask you 2 questions.
This is also a journalist.
Yeah. How do you select who to interview, and where would you like the profile to be in 5 years' time?
Great question. I think the way I select, to be totally honest, is I don't have criteria. I'm just like, is this interesting to me? And if it's not, I don't do it.
It's the best criteria.
Yeah. At this point, I think I know my readers so well that I know if something is going to resonate with them. So I try to choose people who maybe aren't super well known, but have done some remarkable things. So I recently interviewed Laura Decker. She's the youngest person to sail solo around the world. So she started when she was 14. Oh, hi. I just saw you. So she started when she was 14 and finished when she was 16. So it's an incredible story. She's like, it's no big deal. This is what I do. And that's actually the hardest part. These people who do amazing things, they don't think it's amazing. They're just like, this is what I do. So it's hard to tease out the specifics, but it's just my own criteria. And for the profile in 5 years, I would love for it to be more of to have different arms. So I would love there to be a profile arm, an interviewing arm, an event arm. We'll see, like an octopus.
Need a few more. Okay, cool. Question right here.
By the way, congrats. Amazing. Can you tell us about the process of writing the book? And at what point while writing the profile did you decide, okay, this is going to turn into a book, and whether that influenced how you wrote the profiles?
Yeah. So the tricky part is that I never actually set out to write a book. I was just doing my newsletter week after week. At this point, I have written it for 7 years and never missed the Sunday to send it out. And so I was very consistent with it. I was doing that. And I got a message on Twitter from an editor at a publishing house in London. And he was like, hey, I really like your newsletter. If you ever think about writing a book, let us know. And I was like, absolutely not. Because at the time I had a 3-month-old baby and I wasn't sleeping and I was just insane. So I was like, there's no time to write a book. But then I like got curious about it, and I was like, let's just do a call so I can ask you questions. And he basically saw I was interested and kind of convinced me. But the way it worked was that okay, this is how my brain works. So I'll have an idea for something, and then I'll be like, oh, that'll be interesting to write about. And if you read the book, you'll see how the stories are like woven together in really weird ways, because even though you're like, what does this person have in common with this person in the same chapter? But somehow like there's a link. And the way my brain works is like, I have an idea of something to write. And then I'm like, okay, let's like keep this here. And then I go about my day. And then later, another like idea will come. And I almost think about it as like, I visually visualize the pieces of information as puzzle pieces. So I'm like, okay, like I have this one here and this one here, but there's has to be something between them. And then like, as I go through my day, I find that thing and I build it out like that. So the way I put the puzzle together is I have like a Word doc. I just put an idea, then another idea, and I don't write from top to bottom. I write like out of order. So it was interesting writing the book because I had already written so much like for the last 5 years. And I was like, I think that everything's disjointed right now. I think I can make it cohesive. And so it wasn't very hard writing the book because I wasn't starting from scratch. I just had to make it make sense. So it took me like 6 months, but I actually wrote a post on like the exact process, and I call it like writing in the edges of time. Because a lot of like, it's never, if somebody asks you like, when is the right time to write a book? It's never, because there's always going to be something. And I was like hyper aware of that. And I was like, it's always going to be an excuse. Oh, I have a newborn. Oh, I have a toddler. Oh, I whatever. So I was like, I'm just going to write in the edges of time, which meant when the baby was sleeping. So 7 to 9 p.m. and then like 1 20-minute nap. But the reason that's helpful and useful is because it's really hard to write just sitting down at a desk like with no ideas. I get my best ideas when I was like feeding the baby in the middle of the night, or because I was constantly thinking about it. Actually, I know Lee is here. Hi. So she was a senior writer and editor at Fortune, and we had a colleague who, Brian O'Keefe, I one time asked him about like, how do you write a good feature in a magazine feature? And I still have my notes from that day. He said, think about it as like your grandma, or he called it your grandma's tomato sauce theory of feature writing. And it's the same thing for ideas. He's like, what's the difference between the tomato sauce from Whole Foods with your grandma's tomato sauce? It might not be much of a difference. The biggest difference in the like ingredients, the biggest difference is that your grandma's sauce cooks all day long. So it's like you're constantly tweaking and you're like putting things in, taking things out. It's simmering there. So it's like that. My idea generating process is it's like it's got to simmer a little bit.
Yeah. So did you never miss a Sunday even when you had your first baby?
From the hospital as I was sending that thing. No, actually, yes, but it's not because I'm crazy or like a workaholic. I think a lot of people think that. It's like I have things prepared because I know that there's stuff that's going to happen. Like I know I have to travel across the world, or a baby's going to be born, or somebody's going to die. So it's like those moments. Yeah, so inconvenient. But those moments I like prepare, and I have things stacked up. So when the baby was born, I was like, for the next 4 weeks, you're going to be getting like all-time best profiles of the profile, because I don't want to be writing. So I wasn't writing, but I was still sending it.
Yeah. Okay. One more question. Awesome. Right over here. Yes. And there's a mic headed your way.
Thank you. Hi, Paulina. I'm Anna, huge fan of both the book and the profile. I wanted to ask, so earlier you were talking about how Oprah and other interviewers interrupt at strategic times to really dig into moments that could kind of have a lot more underneath the surface. As an interviewer, how do you know when to like dig in, and then when you've kind of gone too far to the point where the subject might be uncomfortable?
Like, you mean you've interrupted too much, or?
Oh, sorry, not interrupted, but just like when do you know like how to dig into tension in a productive way versus like it's to the point where the subject might be like uncomfortable?
Yeah. So the way I always think about it is like I never feel uncomfortable asking because I see myself as like a representative of the readers or the audience. Like I recently watched this horrible interview on ABC about the Golden Bachelor getting divorced, and it's very.
You cut The Bachelor out of your content diet.
No, it's still there, just the golden one. And so she's like asking them, oh, but like you got divorced 3 months after this televised wedding, and they're like, we're still so in love, like we didn't want. What are you talking about? So it's like I think when you feel satisfied that your readers or your viewers are going to be satisfied with the answer, that was BS. Like she should have gone more. And I think a really good interview to watch, oh my God, it's so good. Barbara Walters and Monica Lewinsky in 1999. It's so good. And it's good because it's that. Monica is still very much in love with Bill Clinton, and you see it. And she's like, oh, he's just so tender. And you're like, don't ever say that again. But as she's saying it, Barbara is like, let's like go deeper. And she comes off at times like, have you no shame? But like, she's trying to act on behalf of the viewer because she knows what they're thinking. So I always think about like, what is the elephant in the room? And I don't care if I make you a little uncomfortable. We just got to get to like something that's satisfactory.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everybody. If you have more questions for Polina, you'll see her when you get your book and your signed copy. And thank you again. Thanks, Polina.
So first of all, thank you both to Polina and to Emma for speaking with us today. This was really special, and we're really grateful to have you guys here. We also wanted to take another opportunity to thank our sponsors, Avenue Z and Happenstance Bourbon, which is a female-founded bourbon company. And then also thank you to the venue and the teams, the Strand, What's the Kitsch, and MF Events. So we're going to have a book signing over there. The most organized fashion for us to do this is if you're going to go get a book signed, if you can line up towards that wall on that side so that we don't block the bar. So if people want to go to the bar, they can get a drink. And stick around for some additional networking. And thank you all for coming.